Hello and welcome to the instalment of the Wyfutbol podcast with me, Michael Dryden and Etches Adokru. Today we'll be taking a look at Leicester City, their astonishing title win, their rise towards the top of the Premier League table, and we'll discuss whether the Foxes can remain among the Premier League's elite clubs. Before we start, please follow us on Twitter at YFootball_ and subscribe with us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Acast, and YouTube. Etches, good evening.
Yeah, good evening's different for you. We don't really record that late, but
Mm.
we're recording just after the curtailment of the Premier League season. I'm doing quite well. Pepe was working his magic today. They managed to get the win against. I'm actually really happy, right? Because Tottenham beating Leicester means that Arsenal aren't in Europe, and I really didn't want to be in the Europa Conference. Because that is just absolutely stinking. I just
Yeah.
think the Thursday Sunday games really affected Arsenal. I think a lot of teams do struggle compared to the Champions League setup with the Tuesday Saturday or Wednesday Saturday. And yeah, the Thursday Sunday is just not a vibe, not a look. So I'm actually pretty happy with today's results. Apart from that, I can't complain. Actually, no, saw Ian Wright at a pub yesterday.
No way.
Yeah, actually, Ches, one of my mates, Ches, got a picture. I was playing it cool in the corner. Not Bradley, Sean Wright Phillips was there as well. Actually,
Oh, nice.
yeah, it was one of the son's birthdays, so the whole gang was there. There's no sign of Bradley though, unfortunately.
Oh, the absolute MLS hero that is Bradley Wright Phillips. Isn't that all-time goal scorer?
Yeah, New York Red Bull champion, mate. Anyway, Dryden, how you doing?
Yeah, not well. I mean, Sunderland got beat yesterday in the playoff semi-final, second leg. Well, we won the game, but we lost on aggregate over two legs. So, yeah, we're going to be in League One for a fourth season now, which is mad. And we got
Yeah,
relegated from the Premier League in 2017, and so yeah, fourth season. Yeah,
that's
it's
good.
just
That's good
it's not
maths, though,
great.
mate. It's good.
Yeah, beaten by Lincoln City, man. Like when we were in the Premier League, I think Lincoln City were non-league. And they were getting,
Ah, no, were they?
yeah, I don't know as a fact, but they did rise from non-league football for like a very short period to League One. I mean, if they go up, that's great for them. To be fair, they're well managed, well-run club. But it looks like Blackpool probably take it. And Blackpool we've one of our players, Elliot Embleton, who used to play England under 20 football, but for some reason when he plays for us isn't that good. Is on loan to Blackpool. So, and he scored in the playoff second leg for them,
Oh, really?
semi-final. So it's just us all over to be loaning out players like Sebastian Coates that we mentioned a million times before, on loan to Sporting Lisbon that time. It's just classic Sunderland to have a player on loan at a promotion rival, and then they're in the final, and we'll see what he does in the final. But yeah, which is shocking, man.
Yeah, let's draw a line under the sand there and just call it a day. Uh, on a slightly happier tone, obviously, doing the topic today on Leicester City's rise. Unfortunately, they didn't make the Champions League football, which was a shame, but
Mm.
obviously it's been a fantastic season for them. And kind of why I wanted to do the topic was, in May 2016, Leicester won the Premier League by 10 points as well. I didn't know the gap was 10 points. What were
Mm.
Arsenal doing? We're 10 points off the pace. Anyway, yeah,
That
they
was
won.
Arsenal's year as well. That could
Yeah,
have
it
been
was.
that could have
Yeah,
been the year.
yeah, I've heard that too many times before as well. But yeah, Leicester picked up the title that year. But we saw the likes of N'Golo Kante and Riyad Mahrez. They were
Mm.
unleashed to the Premier League, showing their fantastic ability. You know, Leicester staff were put in the spotlight as well. Steve Walsh was head of football there. He moved on to Everton. Ben Napper, analyst, joined Arsenal, and head
Mm.
of technical scouting Rob McKenzie joined Spurs. That summer players like Drinkwater moved on and Kante, and it really
Yeah.
felt like that campaign was a miracle. It would never happen again, and Leicester would just slowly drift back down to like
Yeah.
mid-table / fighting for relegation. Ranieri was relieved of his duties, and in came Craig Shakespeare, and you thought, and then after that, Claude Puel, and you kind of felt like, yeah, the way they're performing, it was, yeah, that was a one-off. It's not really going to happen. I mean, Puel did help them finish ninth one year, and then he was replaced in February 2019 with the club in 12th, which even then you're thinking, yeah, it's not too bad, really. But then what's happened since then is Brendan Rodgers has come in. They had a really good end to the campaign. I remember they absolutely spanked Arsenal. I think it was 3-0. I remember watching the game. So he'd just come in. I think it was his second game. And
Mm.
yeah, we got absolutely battered. So fair play to him then. But what Brendan Rodgers has done in that time, not just at the end of that season and in the two since, is he's really turned Leicester into Champions League candidates
Yeah.
for the top four spots. You know,
Mm,
they've missed out again today by a point or goal difference, wherever it was. They missed out last year by a similar margin. They've won the FA Cup, and now with a selection of a fine group of players that they have and a really good academy and a really good manager, I kind of want to talk about where did Leicester go on from here, right? It's kind of how Tottenham
mm.
started under Pochettino, where they're kind of like a top six-ish club, but it was really under him where they started to really drive in regular Champions League money, regular qualification, and they really
Yeah.
became a hallmark name. And, you know, their similarities with Brendan Rodgers, relatively young, similar sort of squad profile and being young. And can Leicester now become top four regulars is kind of what I wanted to look into.
Yeah, I mean, they've only to an extent got themselves to play. I didn't see the game, but to an extent, when they got themselves to blame for losing that game today, they took the lead twice through two Jimmy Vardy penalties. But it'd be painful that A, they've lost that game, B, Chelsea lost their game,
Mm,
and then it'll be even worse. Imagine if Chelsea actually win the Champions League because they won't get that fifth spot. So
yeah.
if they win it, and obviously it wouldn't have mattered if they'd finished fourth or fifth. So I mean, Chelsea won't get. But yeah, it'd just be even more painful for Leicester City. It's crazy to think, like going back to that, like 2015, I think Ranieri came in. It's crazy to think that that season possibly would have been, I think he was due to be Nigel Pearson as the manager. Then there was that saga with his son abroad in Asia on
Mm,
tour. And that incident that then led to Pearson being sacked and then Ranieri coming in. So it's just crazy to think that if that saga hadn't happened, Leicester probably wouldn't have won the league with Pearson. I mean, they could have. I mean, they still would have had the personnel that they brought in, which is no fluke, and we'll go on and discuss that. Even though I'd be very surprised if the recruitment staff believe they were getting, in N'Golo Kante and Riyad Mahrez, two players that are in possibly now top five, top three in the world for their positions. Possibly not Mahrez, but yeah, it's no fluke that they brought in these players, but it's I think it's widely regarded that win, that 501 title win was it was astonishing and yeah, was seen as a fluke. But undoubtedly the club, would have continued to grow given the investment in the recruitment side you mentioned and
mm,
the club generally. So, even under Pearson, had he stayed, the club likely would have had that upward trajectory. But obviously, the Premier League win, or perhaps the Premier League win, kind of fast tracked that in a sense. They had Champions League football then. That all the hysteria and the brand benefits that have came around that. So, they weren't included in the Super League plans though.
mm.
So possibly need back-to-back seasons in the Champions League to truly cement themselves among the big boys, financially especially. But then also just in terms of the brand, in terms of fandom and stuff like that. Because at the minute, I mean, if that Super League went ahead, and if it does go ahead without them, then they're going to be cast adrift.
Yeah, very much so. I think the one big takeaway I had from what you just said was you would not want to fight Nigel Pearson. That's what I was thinking when you were talking. I was thinking, it's like, you know what, Ryan's making a lot of sense here, but I was just thinking, if I
Seemingly, yeah.
you just don't want to fight. There are two people in the Premier League I don't want to mess with. Sam Allardyce, look, he's big, but you run around him. Sean Dyche and Nigel Pearson, no chance.
What, you'd fight Steve Bruce?
Steve Bruce is on the way down. He's old, mate. You don't want to be
Yeah.
fighting Sean Dyche. Nigel Pearson's got energy. He's bouncing, but you don't want to be fighting. Nigel Pearson will knock on your door ready, bare knuckle fight, 6 p.m., 7 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. Anytime you want, he'll be there. Sean Dyche is crazy. He'll be there with like barbed wire on the bat. You don't want to fight those two. Steve Bruce, Sam Allardyce, yeah, yeah, come on.
You wouldn't want to go toe to toe with them. But I mean, yeah, but there'd be no shame of losing to those men. But I wouldn't want to fight Rodgers, and I wouldn't want to fight Scott Parker because you don't want to lose. It's a lose lose situation. I mean, have you seen how short Rodgers is? If you beat Rodgers, you're just that guy that's beat up some short bloke. If you get beat, then you're that guy who's been beaten up by Brendan Rodgers and a very short guy. Not that short people can't be hard, but it's a lose
Yeah,
lose, isn't
there's some angry fans listening, ready to come for you, Dryden. That's a good
it?
point. I'm gonna sit on that when I think about it. Kind of moving on to Rodgers. One of the main reasons why Leicester's rise has been, so astronomical has been the inclusion of Brendan Rodgers. So people said, oh, it was an obvious choice that Brendan Rodgers came in, but actually at the time when he came in, there were question marks about his career, right? He did really well as a Chelsea youth coach and at Swansea, and he had an interesting Liverpool spell. I remember when they scored
Yeah.
over 100 goals, but then they conceded like 59, which is actually quite a lot to concede in a campaign if you want to become champions. And in the end, he nearly won the league, when Suarez was there and Gerrard as well, and when Daniel Sturridge was absolutely magical. But, there
Yeah.
were always question marks about the defense. And ultimately, in the end, he had to depart.
Yeah, I've been thinking for a while since that happened. I've always kind of said that he doesn't really get the credit he deserves for that Liverpool spell. I mean, he did have Suarez, and Sturridge is so technically gifted, or was so technically gifted at that time. Um, but I don't think the side overall was, the personnel wise wasn't absolutely amazing in that Liverpool side. And he brought in, a different way of playing. He had Gerrard sitting a bit deeper, pushing the likes of Glenn Johnson. Pushing the likes of Glenn Johnson forwards in the wing back areas, and playing a different brand of football. You had Sterling coming through, I believe, that time as well, who was playing behind the strikers, in a more central area. And then you had Sturridge and Suarez above. So in the forward areas. So I think he was, he brought in a different style. He did so well, and he was so good at Swansea as well. I mean,
Mm.
I remember Leon Britton and Joe Allen running rings around players in the midfield. Like, I don't think he's got enough credit for. He got credit for his time at Swansea, but that time at Liverpool, I know there was that collapse, and that is why he perhaps is getting the stick, or did get the stick that he got because of that collapse. Because once you're in that position, you're expected to maintain it. But I think winning the title with that side would have actually been a major achievement.
Yeah, definitely. I guess you kind of can look at that time and think, yeah, he didn't really get the applause he deserves. That football is very, very, very unforgiving. You can you
Mm.
can get whacked up 10-0, and if you win the next game 7-0, everyone's just forgotten about it. Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just one of those things. Like someone put it quite lightly actually with Arsenal, where Arsenal got the most points in the league since Christmas, except for City, but fans are unhappy with Arteta. If we'd replaced Arteta as manager and someone else had that record, they'd be getting applauded for it because you'd be like, "Oh yeah, you've done
Mm.
really well." So it's just like Swift football is, man. You just have to
Yeah,
take the good with the bad
yeah,
kind
it's
of
true.
thing. But ultimately, as you're right, not Arteta, sorry, Brendan Rodgers, the hard man himself, Brendan Rodgers. Results went up to scratch and he had to leave. He went up to Celtic, and that's kind of was like a rebuilding job for him because Rangers were on the rebuild themselves, and people, particularly in England, say it's a really easy job to do. Obviously, they storm the title every single year, but managers like Ronnie Dyler and Tony Mowbray showed that managing Celtic isn't that easy
Mm.
as people may
Yeah.
think it is. I think winning the league is quite straightforward, but it's the way Brendan Rodgers went about winning this league that was quite unique. I know generally the quality of the managers in SBL is quite weak compared to the Prem, but he was a huge success there. He instilled great football, sweeping all the trophies before him. But then they had that issue where they were about to do the treble. I think they'd won two of the trophies and hadn't won the next. They had the last one coming up.
Mm.
I think it was probably the league. And Leicester came in for him, obviously, before the season ended. And Celtic fans are like, he's a traitor. Like, why would you go to Leicester? Like, after everything we've done for you. When fans get like that, when realistically it's a game and the manager wants to move on, you got to accept it. Sending threats, saying he's a traitor, he's like a disgusting human being isn't really the way to do it. But anyway, he ended up leaving. And that's kind of what started his reign at Leicester. He did really, really well, as I've mentioned, across those 2 years. And quite a few things he changed from Claude Puel, where a lot of the players became disinterested. So the first one was he gave the support of the older players. If you remember,
Mm.
back under Puel, Puel was trying to phase out Vardy. So he basically stopped playing Vardy, or he wasn't playing him as often. And I think he felt a bit ostracized, as well as people like Wes Morgan, etc. That's one of the
Mm.
first things he tried to address, and he did really well in doing that. He also helped the form of Ndidi, which as a Nigerian, I can really vouch for that because he's been fantastic in the
Yeah.
past 2 seasons by simplifying his role. He made Leicester City play much quicker, and I think overall he laid down some really good foundations to help them really thrive as a club. But also a massive bit is down to the sensational recruitment that Leicester City managed to do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel like there's had to be a transition period at Leicester because you mentioned the players earlier that were part of that side. The Kantés, the Red Mahrez, Danny Drinkwater. These players all left, and Vardy could have left. He was linked with Arsenal, wasn't he?
Mm,
But opted against that. So there had to be a transition period because the reason it was so astonishing is because players like even like Christian Fuchs, Danny Simpson, these aren't these aren't like exceptional players. It's just that Ranieri had them playing with such belief in such a way, and they were supplemented by that quality. that we discussed, like Kante and Co. But then when Kante and Co leave, like they did, there has to be a period of rebuilding that. I mean, Spurs kind of went through that with when they lost Bale at that big price tag. And they brought in a number of players like Lamella and Co. That I mean, Lamella's not been too bad; he's been there a long time now. It feels like it's been there a lifetime.
Mm.
But there's other players that came in that didn't really fit the bill, and it's difficult because you've got to bring in a lot of different players because you've received a lot of money as well. Often that means that you have to spend a bit more of a premium, like the Andy Carroll deal to Liverpool when
Mm.
we sold Torres to Chelsea. But they've actually went through that and weathered that quite a lot now, and now they've got to a point where they don't have the likes of Kante, Mahrez, who, as I said before, in their positions are like top 5 in the world, but or in my opinion, are they don't have those exceptional talents, but they have more quality throughout the side, so it's a bit more consistent. And I think they've went through that transition to get there. And as you said, this recruitment's been amazing, and it's had to be to because as innovative they are, they've had such high player turnover since then. Even Chilwell leaving as well recently, which is kind of the more recent, and Maguire to be fair, more recent kind of high profile departure that perhaps wasn't directly after the title win when you can understand it more, perhaps. One player I didn't mention at Swansea actually just came to my head there was the very mercurial Michu, and he seems to have fallen off the planet.
Yeah, he had that one glow season and then didn't really do anything afterwards. I think as well, if there was a manuscript of how to sell a superstar and rebuild, bad example is Tottenham Hotspur when they sold Gareth Bale. Good example is Leicester City with the countless players you could mention, and before maybe Southampton a little bit as well. Tottenham, man, some of those guys. They had Vlad Churches. Was that his name?
Kirches,
Churches.
yeah,
He was
Kirches.
pants, and so was Federico Fazio. Etienne Capoue was okay, but they shipped him on to Watford. Obviously, Ericsson was part of the gang. He was also a very, very good player for them.
Wasn't Soldado was part of
So,
that, wasn't
Soldado,
he?
yeah. he,
Soldado.
he had too much product in his hair. He looked abysmal. And who was the other one as well? Lamella's been underwhelming. He's 30 million, mate. And 30 million then. I mean, he's an okay player, but 30 mil. He was kind of like the gem, so-called, of that group.
Mm.
He's relatively been underwhelming. Like, is he a 30 million player now? Bear in mind that was years ago. No. So realistically, he's been okay. I had to dig in there because yeah, that was an
Yeah,
abysmal
that's
way.
what happens though. You do have to pay more of a premium when you receive those big
True,
fees.
that is true. That is
Which,
true.
but I mean, it doesn't mean that the players have to be bad, and the players they bought weren't great.
We'll pay
I mean,
20 million for
Lamella's.
absolute rubbish. Thank you very much.
And think I'd go back to Michu point as well. I've just again another name popped into my head. Rodgers not only did he do well at Liverpool, but he actually arguably the only manager who's actually got the best out of Sturridge, and is slash was such a gifted player. He did quite well at Chelsea when he's played out on the right. But another player that Rodgers didn't seem so well get the best out of was Danny Graham. I remember there was a point where Danny Graham was banging in goals for Swansea, and he
He
played for
was
us last
doing.
season.
He was
I was,
doing that.
he's 35-year-old and he was awful. He's from the region, that's why he's from Newcastle, but he's dreadful. But for Swansea, he was like Swansea, he's like Raul.
Yeah, he was doing quite well. I knew there'd be a Sunderland link in there somewhere. I just
Yeah, I had to find
I
one.
couldn't quite see it. But to talk about Leicester's recruitment, I think the challenge, for Leicester to break in the top six is really difficult, obviously. And the best way to do it is to recruit really, really well. Since they're tied to win, they've sold a key player each summer. We've spoken about N'Golo Kante and Riyad Mahrez. Danny Drinkwater has been absolutely abysmal since he left. Harry
Mm,
Maguire was joined Man United, and Ben Chilwell as well, for a combined fee of £250 million. Oh, and those group of players are actually recruited for 25, which is brilliant. That's a fantastic return. You know, what enables Leicester to do this, from my reading and research, is their philosophy. They have a really long-term philosophy
mm,
where they don't look for expensive quick fix. They look, they take more of a holistic view on player recruitment and development. Over the years, sorry, big clubs have come in for their staff. I mentioned earlier those members of staff that had gone on to other clubs, but if you've noticed, the ideology hasn't really changed. They've got rid of
mm,
multiple director of footballs because they've either moved on or they've gone elsewhere, and loads of analysts, but they keep signing the similar profile of players, which is typically signing young players, who have long-term potential, who relatively are quite young, and are from potentially less similar clubs to them in terms of success, so the transition is less drastic. So team players like James Justin from Luton, Kyle Garcionchu from Freiburg, Timothy Castagne from
mm.
Atalanta, James Maddison from Norwich, are really good examples of that. I mean,
Mm.
mixed in with that are your very high profile players who loads of big clubs are after. I doubt City were hunting for James Justin, but the likes of Yuri Tillmans, who's been said to be a golden boy since he was 16 or
Yeah.
17, had loads of big clubs after him. James Madison as well. Wesley Fofana. I know West Ham went for Wesley Fofana at the time. He was Saliba's partner at St Etienne. So mixed in with those, unearthed gems from English football or Europe are really, really high profile young players that are also trying to join them as well because they see the opportunity.
Yeah, Tillsman's been absolutely outstanding. His goal in the FA Cup final was an absolute rocket as well. But he's only 24. He plays like a player who's got like 300 games under his belt. As you said, he's one of them players that I think he came through Anderlecht, and
Yeah, correct.
in the Belgian Super League, you can play earlier. It's like with like Delete playing for and captaining Ajax, but it's 17. Like you get opportunities to come through really early, and so he's played so many games for his age. But he's outstanding. And Soyuncu is only 24 as well. He looks about 40, and I tell you what, you wouldn't want to fight Soyuncu, would you? Absolutely no chance. He has
Sionchu.
this absolute Soyuncu. Yeah, he's got a
Yeah,
steel jaw.
yeah. He looks like he's got a mean headbutt, Sionchu.
Yeah, he's
That's what
got
he
a big,
strikes me
big,
as.
big platform.
Yeah.
Wesley Fofana as well. He's 20 years old. Like they've just signed so well, and he's an excellent player as well. 20. Like his
Yeah.
resale value would be mad, and so will Tielemans though.
All of
Tielemans.
them, all of them.
Yeah.
The list goes on. Tillman's right is 24. He looks about 9. Why does he look so? He looks about 9 years old. He's got the
Yeah,
face
he
of a
does. Yeah.
9-year-old. But yeah, no, you're not wrong. I mean, we mentioned the players that they've all signed. Supporting those players has been a fantastic academy. We've got Hamza Chowdhury, who plays them quite often. England under 21 player. Luke Thomas, who's played at
Mm.
fullback this year. Who's obviously very good. Ben Chilwell, who was obviously a big player for them, and Harvey Barnes. Unfortunately, he's had injury this season, which ruled him out of the Euros, but he's been really heating up in the past 2 seasons. So that's
Yeah.
that's what Leicester have. They've got the perfect mix, right? They've got some elder statesmen there. They've got some really good young players that they're signing, and also a fantastic academy, which has given the players to do that. And it all points to a club which I think happens at Leicester, where there seems to be very little interference from above. I feel like they've got a really good owner where the owner is very supportive, but he doesn't really get involved. I guess
Mm.
Chelsea do very well, but Roman Abramovich is very involved there. And some other clubs are good examples of that as well. But it seems to me at Leicester is very much like the recruitment teams. There's a general ideology or a manuscript which everyone has to follow, and they're all allowed to just do what they need to do by trusting them.
We shouldn't forget that they do have resources, right? I mean, every club in the Premier League does. You can't get where they are without resources. So you can have the best blueprint in the world if you don't have the money in football now. You can't get there. Um, but I mean, Leicester's model has worked so well, and most other clubs, or a lot of other clubs, have a lot more kind of short-termism. Sunderland are a prime example. Thought I'd then finally get us back to Sunderland.
Yeah.
Um, we used to have a wealthy owner in Ellis Short, American owner. Spent millions over his tenure. I think he was at the club for around 10 years. Spent millions on the first team. But what Leicester have done, and what our new owner is trying to do now, he's came in, Louis Dreyfus, is they've invested in the club first and then brought players in on the back of that. So just poured money in the first team. But without that kind of smart recruitment behind it, we were signing players that were quite obvious. Spent like 12 million on Connor Wickham or Stephen Fletcher. These are players that were doing well in the Football League, but cost a premium because of that. And then they came in and it was just, disjointed. So throwing money at the first team isn't actually always that beneficial. What you do, what Leicester have done, build smarter, invest in a lot more intelligently in the background, in the staff, in the recruitment side first, and then you can build rather than trying to build before or kind of run before you can walk, so to speak.
Yeah, very much so. I think the best clubs always sell well. I think I saw a tweet which was how competent a club is how much money they bring in from player sales. And I couldn't agree more
Yeah.
because it seems to be in the Prem, Chelsea are very good at selling their players. 130 million for Eden Hazard, 1 year left in his
Mm.
contract, absolutely mad. They
Yeah.
basically recouped the money for Morata when he was crap. Ramirez, Oscar went for stupid amounts of money to China. They're generally very good at selling players. I think the competency is when you've got clubs that don't sell very well. That there are issues at the club, and I think Leicester are one of those teams where it's very clear that the club is well run. They invest money into the club. They know when to sell because selling players. We were talking about rebuilding and how we're going to go into it now about how far Leicester can go. I think keeping a player is a very difficult balancing act because you keep the player, he can be a really bad influence, or you don't want him around, but you also have
Mm.
to stick to your guns about how much he's worth. Leicester held out for 80 million for Harry Maguire because Liverpool paid 75 for what's his name, Van Dijk. It's very difficult to do because Man United or could say, oh, if we just put the pressure on, Maguire can make it difficult for them there. But I think what they've done with a lot of these players is because they've given opportunity, because they've treated them very well. I think there's a very good relationship between the players and the staff and the setup, so that you don't get disgruntled types of characters. You don't get Payet. I remember when Payet wanted to leave West Ham, and he was doing all sorts, not turning up
God,
to
yeah.
training, the whole shebang. Whereas I think Leicester do it quite well. There's an acceptance that they'll go, but the price is a premium, and clubs pay it. 50 million for Ben
Yeah.
Chilwell, 80 for Maguire, 60 for Mahrez. They really have done very well. And that's kind of what we're coming on to now, is how far Leicester can go. And it's a really difficult question to answer, because the obvious point is, yeah, don't sell your best players and you'll be fine. But, naturally, if
Yeah.
Leicester are on the rise and if Kelechi and Iheanacho goes and becomes the Premier League Golden Boot winner, and Leicester come fourth, but City want to buy him, he's still probably going to want to move to City. And it's kind
Mm.
of how they move from there. They need to be a top four regular to kind of emulate that Pochettino period. Pochettino came in that period where a lot of those Spurs players stayed together, led by Harry Kane, who he arguably is and still is their star player. A very influential Dele Alli stayed when he had very hot form.
Yeah.
Eric Dyer stayed and had very hot form. Danny Rose. I remember when Man United and Chelsea were looking at Danny Rose. They were very good. I mean, Kyle Walker did leave in the middle of that as well, but generally they
Yeah.
kept a lot of that team together. And I think that's what Leicester kind of need to do. And I think they actually can do. I think at the moment, if you really look at the team now, there's not too many whispers about many of the players leaving. I know Sionchu is being watched by a few clubs for a while, but I think they're quite set. Vardy's too old to be bought by a top team now, so he's still there and obviously very influential.
Mm.
And when you go through the team, there seems to be a lot of players that I think are quite settled there, which is good.
Yeah.
So they can obviously grow. And they've got a very good youthful squad, fantastic manager, brilliant academy. Who's also, in terms of Brendan Rodgers, he's also very set. I think it's really worth noting that when Tottenham obviously sacked Mourinho, he was very distant from the Tottenham rumours and he didn't really seem interested. I know that when Arsenal sacked Emery, he got a new Leicester deal, he got a new contract, and I
Mm.
feel he sees it as a big project. I think obviously if Rodgers goes, it can all unravel, but he seems very set to stay. Um, so for me, I kind of feel like the sky's the limit for them in terms of being top four contenders. But it's just about keeping those players and also being able to grow. I think Southampton really highlight, oh yeah, they're really good at selling players, really good at selling players. But then a few wrong turns. I mean, like Buffal and not
Mm.
Castro, what's that guy called? Carrillo, yeah, Guido Carrillo, who they signed. These useless players are, because after a while, when you replace the Manes, etc., and the Lalanas, you get to a point where you get a little bit stuck, right? And I know when Leicester won the league, they signed some absolutely pants players. That Adrian Silva, who didn't really settle, and Samani, who didn't settle, and Ahmed Musa.
Yeah.
So it highlights that if you make too many mistakes in one go, it can be a detriment. So selling players is a good thing, but keeping hold of players are good is probably better for long-term success.
Yeah, definitely. I think the more quality that you have within your team, the likely players are to buy into the project. So I mean, I know you have to get them players there in the first place, but if you've got a quality side, if you're someone like Yuri Tillman's looking around you and you've got quality in the team and you've got a quality manager, which they do at the moment, he's more likely to pen a new contract, stay with the project. But I mean, they have the right manager now and they have the right model. But the competition is just so fierce. The best players want to play in Europe, and if they're going to be a top six team or top four team, sorry, to be in the Champions League consistently, they're going to have that quality of player. But that quality of player wants to play in Europe, and if they can't consistently get top four because it's so hard. I mean, if we put them into that mold, it's actually top seven, isn't it? It's actually top seven teams if they are actually part of that elite. And there's only four spots. I mean, Spurs, Arsenal, Liverpool, and Chelsea this season have had poor league campaigns by their own standards. I know Liverpool and Chelsea finally made it into top four at the expense of Leicester and Tottenham and Arsenal, but they still had poor campaigns. And if Leicester had made it in, it would have been on the back of a poor Chelsea or Liverpool season had the results went right today. So it's just, even if they have good seasons, there's a chance they might miss out. And that applies to all of them, but obviously the better side, some teams like City, teams like Liverpool, clubs like Manchester United with such resources are more likely in the long run to be in that top four spot.
Hmm.
United. are arguably one. They've got a good squad now. Arguably one good managerial appointment away from being that kind of City or Liverpool side. They've got the resource to do so. Um, so you, as a quality player, you're more likely to join a club like that because, or even move from Leicester to one of those clubs because you're thinking, if you're Ben Chilwell, you're thinking, yeah, I'm enjoying my time at Leicester. I've got good players around me, good manager. I think they've just unveiled a new training complex as well, Leicester, which looks really good, or did so this season. And you're thinking, well, where am I more likely to play Champions League football? Where am I more likely to get in the England squad? Where am I more likely to get a better
Yeah.
contract, better wages? It's at one of the other clubs. And so I just think unless they can consistently prove that they're going to be in the Champions League season on season, and then the financial benefits that come from that, and then the contracts attached they can offer on the back of that, that's how they cement themselves. But as we've discussed in other pods, I mean, we've got what 7 teams that I've listed there that are all vying for top four. So it's it's just unsustainable, the Premier League, because you just haven't got enough spots to get into the Champions League.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Is that as much as you want Leicester to become top four regulars, where's the space?
Yeah.
I mean, we're trying to fit six into four, and there's like seven into four, and then eventually Southampton get their act together, and West Ham and Everton is like 10 into four spots, and you're completely right, it's getting harder and harder. But I definitely do think that these last 2 seasons have shown that they are here to stay. And I think if
Mm.
they keep this core together, which I think they'll definitely stay for another 2 years at least, and with the players they're managing to sign, they're signing good European talent, then I think, yeah, the Champions League is a real possibility for them next season.
Yeah, agreed. I'll certainly be rooting for them in terms of the Premier League, not for Arsenal. But yeah, thank you, thank you, Etches, for the input today on Leicester City. Very odd to be recording on a Sunday evening, but you know, it's a nice little change. We'll see what happens in the Champions League final. We've got the England squad getting announced on Tuesday, so a lot of things still to come up, even though the Premier League campaign is now curtailed. But thank you all for listening, guys, and we will see you next time.
Cheers, guys.